Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is for the December Thank You Challenge. I'm going to be using this bear from Bear Necessities by Simon Says Stamp and this thank you sentiment from Scripty Sayings by Lawn Fawn. I'm going to start off by inking up my sentiment with some VersaFine black onyx ink, and I'm stamping it on a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'm going to sprinkle it with some clear embossing powder and heat it to set it, and that'll just make it pop a little bit. Then I'm going to take some masking tape. This tape I bought years ago. It used to come in a roll. Now it comes in sheets. You can just cut a strip of it, and I'm going to stamp the sentiment on here, and then I'll cut it out to use as a mask. But what I didn't realize when I was stamping here is I actually had some ink on my block on the upper left-hand corner. You can see it, and I got it on my panel. So after I realized that later on, I went ahead and created a new one because it was just too thick of a line to really fix. I'm going to cut this mask out right underneath the sentiment in the line. It's kind of hard to get this mask working with some scissors because of all the little scribbly details in it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a masking pen, and I'm going to use the pen to get into all those little areas. So for my masking tape, I'm just going to kind of be very general and just cut according to the line and just straight across the words, and then the details I'll capture with the pen. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up a little bit so I can just cut all the way around this curve really quick, and I'm not going to worry about those little circles. I'm going to fill them later with the fluid. So you can see I saw it now. I went ahead and just did a whole new panel. So here is my masking fluid in pen form. It's called Molotow, I think that's how you say it, and you shake it up like a paint pen. The tip of this is not very fine, but it does come out bright blue, which is kind of nice because you could see what you're coloring pretty easily. The downside, however, what I found was that when you take it off, it leaves a very faint blue residue. And it's probably not noticeable to anybody who's receiving the card, but I noticed it and I wasn't that happy with it. The first version I made of this card, I actually colored with this pen about 1/2 inch below the sentiment just to cover the whole thing. And then when I took it off, you can sort of see where the blue ended and where the white started. And so I decided to just color underneath the words to capture all that detail with the pen, because the pen is good for detail. And then I just covered the rest with that masking tape that I created earlier. So I think once I got this off, I couldn't really see the blue. But I think you can use this pen, like if you've already colored an area and you want to cover it up with masking fluid, that's a great way to do it. Or if you're going to be covering a whole white area and taking off the whole thing, I think the faint blue is only noticeable if you have it right next to white. And this is where I had it right next to white. Anyway, so this, because it's like a paint pen, if you want more fluid, you just kind of push down on the tip and it goes inside the pen and more fluid comes out. Anyway, so I'm going to go through here and I'm going to just color the very bottom of my line, and I'm just going to go back and touch up any areas that I might have missed because I want to make sure I'm really careful not to get anything below this line. Now while that dries, which only takes a couple of minutes, I'm going to do my bear here. I'm stamping him in some Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'm going to color him with some Copic markers. I've got E57, 55, and 53, and I'm not worried about going outside the line because I'm going to be cutting him myself. There are some dies that come with this set. I have them actually, but I didn't want that white outline around it. I wanted it to be cut right up against that black image, so I cut it by hand. So that's why I'm not too worried about coloring outside the lines. Anyway, so I'll speed this up and I'll be back in about a minute. All right, now that he's all colored, I'm going to go ahead and cut him out with my scissors. Now it's time to put my masking tape on. My fluid is dry, you can see, and you know, I cut it just underneath that line, so all the details are going to be covered with that fluid, and then I'll just make sure that I cover just underneath that with my masking tape. So I just want to make sure that there's no gap between that fluid, pen, and my masking tape. And now I'm going to be covering this with some Distress ink. So I've got 3 different colors that I'm going to use, and you can see I have 2 ink applicators for each color family. I have a dark one and a light one. So one I use for dark blues, one I use for light blues. I've got a set for dark green and light green. I don't have an applicator for every single color. So when I start off, I like to prime my applicator, and so that's just getting some ink on the applicator and practicing a little bit so that you get kind of a nice layer of ink already on the applicator and you don't get those rectangular blocks when you put it on your cardstock. So what's the best way to do this here is to just roll onto the cardstock from off the cardstock. And sometimes I even actually roll circles off the cardstock a couple of times before I go on. I noticed that I didn't cover the bottom here. I didn't want any accidents, so I grabbed a couple of Post-its and covered the bottom to keep myself safe. Anyway, so this is tumbled glass, and I'm going to just roll onto the cardstock from the side, and I'm going to speed this up a little bit, but you start off with very, very light pressure, and it does take a lot of patience to get this right. And then as the ink comes off the applicator, I will apply more pressure. Now I'm moving on to my Broken China, which is the medium blue, and again I'm going to start off to the side, and this one's a little bit harder because it's in the middle of the 3 colors, and so you kind of have to start off to the side and work your way to the middle each time. I'm using the same applicator I used with the tumbled glass, so I didn't prime this one, and it worked out just fine. And now it's time for the Chipped Sapphire, which is the hardest because it's the darkest. And so I'm going to prime it. You can see as I'm priming it that I'm getting quite a few rectangular blocks on this piece of scratch paper. So it's best to get all that out of the way on your scratch paper so you get a nice smooth blend on your actual project. I'm going to start off to the edge and then apply circles onto the cardstock. And again, just slowly and patiently applying a very light layer, then another light layer. And so you just kind of have to work through it, just doing a little bit at a time. So anyway, I'm going to speed this up a little bit so we can get through this. You can see I'm actually circulating my applicator a couple of times on the craft mat before I even get to the cardstock, just to make sure that I don't get any of those blocks. So I'm just going to work my way around. I like to make a darker edge also because I think it makes the panel pop a little bit more. Now finally, after I'm done with that Chipped Sapphire, I'm going to take my middle color because the Chipped Sapphire is quite a bit different than the other 2 colors. And just to make sure that there's a nice blend, I'm going to take my Broken China and I'm going to blend it right there on the line between the Broken China and the Chipped Sapphire, just to make sure I have a nice even color between the bottom and the top. And that's the finished ink blend. So what I decided is to add some ink splatter. So I'm going to take the white and this iridescent white from my Gansai Tambi watercolors. These are great for paint splatters because the paint is thicker than a typical watercolor. So I'm going to take some water first. I've got a medium-sized brush. It's flat. I'm going to put it off to the right side because there's so much shadow coming from the left. I'm really sorry about these shadows. I'm doing my best here with my temporary craft situation. So I'm going to cover the paper, the masking tape, with this is a Stamp-A-Majig sheet, but you could cover it with any piece of plastic or the backing from a stamp set or whatever, just so you don't get any paper wet because it'll get soggy and it might get through to your cardstock. So I did some water, just plain water splatters first, and I kind of regretted it a little bit because the splatters came out pretty thick and I didn't really want them to be that thick. So I'm gonna cover that a lot with the bear anyway. So I'm starting with the white now and I'm tapping it. I'm using just a little bit of water, and I do this every single time. I always start with just a little bit of water, and that's going to give you some tiny little splatters, and then you can move up to bigger splatters just to be safe, because you don't want to go in with tons of water and then you get big huge splatters. So I kind of work my way up. So now I'm adding just even more, and you can see that's when the big ones really started to come out, is when you get more water. So once I have that covered with the white, I'm going to move on to the iridescent. It gives a nice shimmery, cool snow effect. And I'm going to wipe off my brush and get some new water. And this This palette is a little bit harder. I don't know, it's kind of hard to get the paint going with the water, but once you get it going, it does come up. And so I'm going to splatter it again with just a little bit of water, and then I'm going to add a little bit more so that I can get some more of this out. And it does make quite a bit of a mess. I always forget to put it inside a box. It's so much better if you do that. So this paint comes off pretty easily. It's not a big deal, but it would have been an easier cleanup if I would have done it inside a box. Anyway, so now that I'm done with that, I'm going to clean up this mess, and then I'll come back and peel the masking tape off. Now that everything's cleaned up, I can take off my Post-its and my masking tape. This is the fun part when you get to see the results. And then I've got my masking fluid that I need to rub off, which is very similar to the masking fluid I've been using for snow in the recent videos. I just rub it off with a finger. So you just rub it off and it comes right off. And as I said, there is a little blue residue, but it's such a small area that I covered that I couldn't even see it at all. So I'm just going to speed this up, and it got into all those little details of the word. So I was really happy with the results. And you can see also that snow, how iridescent and sparkly it is. Alright, next step is to put my bear on. I'm just going to put some Stampin' Up! Dimensionals on the back, and then I'll pop him right there above the sentiment. And I didn't want him to look like he was floating, so I wanted to ground him a little bit, and to do that I just took a C1 Copic marker and I colored a little bit of a shadow underneath him so it looked like he was standing in the snow. And then finally I took an ATG gun, and I'm going to put some tape runner around my card, and then I'm going to adhere it to a base which I have opening from this side just to have something a little bit different. So I'm going to put that on top and cover the whole thing. I didn't have any excess to cut off this time. And that's the card for today. I think this bear is so cute. I like the way it turned out. I hope you did too, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.